This video is sponsored by SKETCHFAB. SKETCHFAB is the world's largest platform to publish, share, and discover 3D content on web, mobile, AR, and VR. With SKETCHFAB, you can publish, share, discover, buy, and even sell your 3D, VR, and AR content. SKETCHFAB provides you an online 3D viewer based on the WebGL and WebVR technologies, and this simply allows users and visitors to view content on mobile, desktop browser, and virtual reality headset. And if you're wondering where next to publish and check out 3D content, go SKETCHFAB. Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to askNK. So today we're taking a look at Amorpaint, more like a free 3D software that you can use for texturing your scene, objects, and props. So by default, this software is totally free. So in case you want to get it, you can come over. I'm going to put a link to where you can go over to the GitHub and compile this. And there is a huge set of news coming. And so it's very interesting to see that you now have Windows, Linux, macOS, and now it's available for Android. How you can get started with this is extremely simple. First of all, come get this tool for free, download it. And we've also covered a couple of news about this tool on the channel. And if you want to purchase this, you want to purchase the compiled version, you can also purchase the compiled version right here. And it's very interesting to see that we have a brand new version that is available just 15 hours ago. This was made, and it is just about 7 megabytes of data that you might need for you to be able to start texturing right now. So with that said, let's dive right into the Amorpaint and talk about this beautiful tool and everything you guys need to know about. So with Amorpaint open, one of the first things you would notice is the viewport. So the viewport is extremely clean and nice. And you might also notice that the way you move around this viewport is very industry standard like, owing to the fact that you can hold on Alt and the middle mouse, you know, to pan things around, Alt and the left mouse to orbit around things, up and the right mouse button to zoom in and zoom out. If you want to change how your environment light actually appears on your model, hold down Shift with the middle mouse and you'll be able to do that. And there are also certain things that you might want to do within the viewport, which we're also going to get to very soon. Moving on, you can see all of the set of tools that you might want to work with. You have your paints, your brush, your fill, your decal, your text, your clone, your blur tool is right here, your particles tool is here, your baking tool, your color ID, and also your picker. So all of the things you want, they are right here. You might also notice that you have a couple of panels here that is also very similar with Photoshop and also Substance Painter. So right here is where your layers are, and it's just very interesting to see that you have that. And you can choose to create multiple layers. You can also go over to your history, and right now you can check out the histories that you have. Here has to do with the plugins, and if you go over to the plugin manager, this is where you actually manage everything. All right, so you can manage things that has to do with the kind of files you can import in, which we have here as TIFF, which has to do with the TIFF file if you want to be able to import those type of textures. Here has to do with the STL GLTF, which has to do with model types that you can bring in. Here you can choose to remap your keys if you're not comfortable with the shortcut keys that it has here, the keystrokes that you have, you can choose to remap them. Here has to do with your viewport. So if you want to get, you know, screen-based ambient occlusion, you can check that. If you want to have bloom, you can check that. If you want to have, you know, screen space reflection, you can also check that. You can also, you know, punch in a couple of vignettes to beautify your scene, you know, try to give it that cool finesse thingy. And you can also play with the sampling size if you want. And for the pen, because we're using an XP Pen 22E Pro, I'm also going to go ahead and check the brush opacity. For the usage, I'm also going to keep this usage as it is, and I might want to turn on live brush depending on what we're working on. And for the undo, because right here you also notice that you have a couple of undo history, which is very cool. So for that, I'm also going to set the undo to about, let's say, 30. So I'm just going to set it to 30 so that we can easily go back to what we forgot and come back depending on what we want to do. For the interface, we're just going to leave the interface as the dark theme. If you want to get this as, you know, light, you can proceed with that, but I have no idea why you want to do that. So I'm just going to set this back to what it is and simply dab out. Within here is where you get to see all the properties that has to do with all the tools you're selecting. So right now, if I select the decal, you can see that going here. If I select the fill, you can see that here. The erase, you can see that here, and also the paint, you can see the properties of that right here. So how do you proceed with painting? That brings us to material. So for you to be able to proceed with the painting, you need a layer and you need the material you need to paint here. So how does this work? This is where it becomes even way interesting than what it was previously. So what you can do is, let's actually talk about this. Here is your material, here's your brushes, here's your particles, fine. So within this section, if you double click, you'll be able to have access to the material, and the material works based off a node kind of hierarchy. All right, so if I switch these all the way up and start texturing or start painting, as it's said, you will notice we're painting directly onto our model based on the material value that we have set here. I can proceed to setting this to a color like this, and we can start painting, and you can also see what we have. What about if you want to paint in 2D? So for painting in 2D, you need to double click here, and you'll be able to see the 2D section of what you want to paint. So for this, if I switch this to UV, you can now see the entire UV of the model that we're working on. So I can have this right here, and I could be like, maybe I want to paint somewhere like here, and maybe somewhere like here, and somewhere like here, probably somewhere like here as well, and maybe somewhere like here and here. So you can choose to do all of those or make all those decisions directly on your 2D, and at the same time you can proceed with doing those things here in 3D. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. So with this going on, it doesn't end here. The fun actually just got started because you can make multiple materials, and with the multiple material right now, let's say I'm going over here to get a color like this, probably something like that. I can drag this right in here and fill the whole thing here. If I also want to change the fill, let's say I want to change this to something like that, all right, I can also change it by simply, you know, moving this around, and you can start noticing that going on. But this is because our material has been applied here and not the texture. So I'm going to right click and simply delete this, and take this one and actually go through right click and move this all the way up so we can move it up. And if I would like for some reason to still create a brand new material and bring this all the way to red and choose to fill a layer. So I want to fill this layer. I don't want to apply the material because previously we applied this material, and that's why you can see it in the hierarchy. If I want to use the fill to apply the red material on this layer, what we can do is grab onto the red material, make sure we have, grab onto the red, make sure that we have the red material selected, make sure we have this selected, and I'm just going to go ahead and click. How you note that is we now have everything here painted with that. So if I come through and select this, which has to do with the eraser, and start cleaning out the parts, you would notice we're cleaning out this part and we're revealing what is underneath. So I'm going to simply select this right now and, you know, change this to a color like this. And if I proceed with the cleaning, you would notice we're having this. So you can also notice that we have a couple of bloom going on here. The reason why we can see that bloom is because we made that active while we were in our plugin manager. All right, when we went over here and clicked here, we actually went over to the viewport and made bloom active, and that's why we can see that. So with the erase, you can proceed with erasing stuff. So I can choose to erase this. I can actually proceed with right clicking this right now and deleting it, or just simply turning this totally off. So if I turn this off, you can now notice that we're revealing what we have underneath, which is this. So if you don't have anything underneath, it's going to reveal a dark or black background for you, which might not really be, you know, so exciting for you to work with. It's still totally dependent on what you want to do though. So with this here, we should also proceed with talking about some other interesting things, which would make me come back and just simply grab onto this and fill this up one more time. So we're going to talk about the decals. So with the decals, you can select this and actually, let's add the new one and apply. So I'm going to select a different color right now. Let's make something much more brighter and apply the decals here. So I can have that there, and I can apply another decal, apply another decal, apply another decal. And I can actually switch this right from here and, you know, change the decal. So I'm grabbing onto this. I can also change the decal how much I want. So right now you may not see that happening because we haven't proceeded with importing a decal. So if you want to import what you would use to drive your decals, you may want to import them as 2D images by simply clicking on import. And I'm going to select this object and drag this directly in. And you also notice a cool thing that the decals, they are being placed based off the position of the camera. So to proceed with this, what we can do is now that I've brought in these images, we will drag in the image over to this point. So by simply dragging in this right here, and you remember we created a brand new layer for that, I would go ahead and drive these over to this point where I have called color, and then I would also, all right, I would also choose, and let's position this right here. I would also choose to drive this other one. So I'm also going to zoom a little bit out, something like that. Let's switch the mouse and drive these over to opacity. So now once I have that, I can now proceed with painting the decals directly in here. So you remember we actually had this other one working before, so I can do that. And we can, you know, go ahead and get some very interesting looking positions. You see, things like that. Yeah, you can do that. Let's also import one other one for novelty's sake. So I'm just going to go ahead and import askNK and just simply drag that and drop here and rewire this. Now, the reason why we're rewiring this is because I would like to also explain something to you guys. Right now, you see, because we're dragging in askNK as a logo, a decal, it is a bit squashed. So if you want to stretch this, you can proceed by simply using the scale option that we have right here, and I can choose to scale this. So let's scale this a little bit more, and you can see it just simply gets bigger, and we have something like that. So when it was set to 1, you could see it was crunched, but now we scaled it all the way to 2. You would now notice that we have this here. So I can now proceed with clicking that and having askNK being placed there. But if for some reason you're bringing in a file, and let's say we want to paint this as white instead of black, what we can do now is we can still choose to bring in a couple of extra nodes that we can use. So I can drag this all the way out, drag this itself, and type the word invert. And at this point, we can throw in an inverted object here and use the color to drive this. So once I do that, you can now notice we have a white version of the askNK, and then you see we have black version and also another white one. So you can go ahead and start processing these things and getting good with them. And with the decals talked about, you can also choose to use your text to get some very interesting things going for you too. So with the text, we can come here and simply type the word cube, so CUBE, and with cube there, we can also, let's create a brand new layer for that. Yeah, so we can also place the word cube right there. So the reason why you might also notice that we're having some very not looking nice stuff is because we are still using this same stuff. So if I would like to get the very best out of the text, what I would do is to rewire this back here, and that's why, you know, this is a bit more procedural than regular. I can rewire this right here and take out the opacity, because the opacity was driving what we had here. So I'm going to take this out, and now you can see we have the cube here. I'm also going to go ahead and punch this about 2 as it is, and you can now see that we have this cube. If you want to increase your brush size or you want to increase your text size, you can use the open or the close bracket the same way you increase your brush or reduce your brush while working in Photoshop. And also Substance is also a very good way that you can use to do that. So I can now place this here and drive these things as much as I want. It's also, you know, worth advising that whenever you're making a couple of things like this, you know, you might want to create multiple materials that you can use to get things going. With the clone tool, you can use it to clone certain parts of your model. You can also proceed to using the blur tool to blur certain parts. So in case you want to blur certain sections, you can also proceed with that. So you can also use the particle tool itself to apply particles around your object. So let's say we want to apply a couple of particles around here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just, you know, do this. You would now start noticing that we have some particles happening here. So the more I stroke this, the more particles I get. The less I stroke it, the less particles I tend to get. So you can use this to control the particles. And for the opacity, you can also use this to increase and reduce how much opacity you want. And the opacity and, you know, the blending option also exists here, because if you click down here, so let's say for example I would like to get this, I can come through, click down here, and I can choose to reduce and increase the opacity, and this is the texture resolution of the file we're working with. And you also notice that right here we have this set to 8 bits, and we can punch this to 16 or 32 bits. So with all of these things talked about, I think this is the best time for us to bring in a model. So we already have a model that we downloaded from SKETCHFAB, and this beautiful model that we have here is something we're going to use in Amorpaint. So one thing to also note is with Amorpaint, you can now import OBJ files, FBX, and also blend files. All right, so with our model here and ready to go, you would also notice that we already went ahead to turn on our voxel ambient occlusion. So I can come through and go over to the viewport and just simply turn this off so that we can have something like that. And you can see this model in its glory. So what if you have textures that you've worked on in previous places and you want to bring them in? How do you proceed with that? So how you can proceed with this is very, very simple. You can just simply hit the import button and import all of the textures that you've worked with before. So right here, I can bring in this texture, I can bring in these textures individually, or I can simply go ahead and load all of these textures directly here by simply clicking, dragging, and dropping them here. So if you do that, you can load the textures, and if you simply double click on any of the textures, it's going to open up a brand new window. Now, talking about windows that you can open, is also worth knowing that if you press tab on your keyboard, you can load up this other window that has to do with the material, and if you press the tab one more time, you can get rid of that. If you also double click on the texture or on the material or on the layer, you can also close that window. But if you want to get a two-sided window, something you don't have in Substance, if you click over to the viewport and go over here, you can now split the view and you'll be able to see your object in two different views. All right, you can now say, I would like to see this object right here doing something like this. So you might want to see this object right here. You can do that. You can also choose to, see this object, being positioned in a different view, maybe this being positioned in a different view like this. So once you're texture painting, you can see different angles at the same time. This is something I really wish that you can get in Substance, which you cannot get at this point. So with this going on, next thing which we're going to do is just simply go ahead, load up this material that we have and load all of these things in. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag all of them one after the other. So I'm dragging all these things right here. Okay, so I think I dragged a couple of them way over one, which has to do with the albedo. So with this, we're going to connect the albedo over to where the albedo is. So right here, we're going to do that. Yes, sir. Next, we're going to do is take the opacity and drive it over here. Okay. We're also going to do the same thing that for here, which has to do with the roughness. So I'm just going to go ahead and drive the roughness with this. And I'll do the same thing right here with the metallic. We're also going to go ahead and drive the metallic. And we're going to drive the emissive object with this. So let's get this ready and drive it over to the emission. So how you apply this is simply click, drag, and drop. And with that done, you can now see our model is good to go and ready. So from here, let's go ahead and play with our lights. So I can now, move the lights a little bit. You can start seeing that we have this emission happening. So we can have this here, and we can also proceed to playing with these objects based off various things. So at this point, if you want to continue with texturing this, you may want to add more like a mix shader, or you want to mix certain things together. So for example, if I drag this out and maybe I want to brighten this, I can use the bright and the bright and contrast and drop this here, and I can choose to drag this over to the color, and I can increase the brightness of this model. I can also bring this down and increase the contrast on this model. So these are very helpful things that you might want to get going. And right now I can also take a look at what this looks like in a different view. And with this, if you come over to this part where you have meshes, you would see the amount of meshes that makes up our scene. So simply click in here, you can see all of that. And if I click over to the tools, these are tools that we can use to calculate certain parts of the model. So with this, you can right click here and we can choose to add like a black mask. So for that, what I want to do is just simple. So I'm just going to let this be. Let's float this a little bit. So let's go ahead and float this. And I can now use a mask, come over here and get to the black mask. And with the black mask, nothing is visible. That simply gives us an option to paint white within the section. So if I switch this back to what it is, select this part and paint, you now notice that we cannot paint anything. Now the reason why we cannot paint is because we haven't selected just this. What we selected earlier was this, but if you proceed to selecting just that, you can use this to paint. So right now, if I go in here and start making my paintings, I can paint this mask section out. Now if you want to see what your UV map looks like, you can also click over here and you'll be able to see what the UV map looks like, and you can now use your mouse wheel to zoom right in. And let's actually start making some very conscious decisions. Let's drop something there and see where it applies. And yeah, so it applies somewhere like here. So we can also proceed to using that to, you know, painting this, and you can choose to use, you know, your UVs to drive this. So like right now I'm using the UVs to drive this, or you can use some sort of projection to drive this, or using a triplanar. So you can use that and you can drive something like that. And of course you can see what we're having here. So I can go in and make some extra paintings, and you can actually see that happening there. And if you're thinking about baking like your texture coordinates, your position, your ambient occlusion, you know, or maybe your curvature, because you want to use it to drive certain things in your model or on your model, then you can consider using this as a very good tool that you can, you know, use to drive all of this interesting looking stuff. And by the way, you can also notice that we have our screen space, you know, reflection going on as we proceed with the baking. And these are very lovely things. So in case you're thinking about, you know, creating things like this, these are ways that you can do this thing. There's also a browser which you can use to access files directly from here. You also have a script and then a console. But let's talk about displacements. So for displacement, if you want to create some sort of displacement, you may want to go over and work with the height. So for the height, I'm just going to apply and get a texture. So I'm just typing texture, and I would get a checker texture. So I think that works. So I'll also load up that checker texture directly in here, and I can choose to load the material, which is also something I think we should do at this point. And I'm going to turn this off, so you can start seeing that we have this here. So with this going on, I can play with the scale, and right now the reason why we're not seeing this is because our object as it stands is set to project instead of UV plane or UV map, and it's also set to face instead of object. So if I set it to object right now and I select this, drop it directly there, click and drag and drop here. Actually, that was what we're supposed to do. So let's simply take this out and say delete. Yeah, so once we do that, you will now start noticing that we have a displacement going on here. So if I hold down shift and middle mouse, you can start seeing that. Of course, you would see this happening here. If we switch this, so let's simply get a new object here. So I'm just going to open up a new and get a sphere, which I think it's a much more better example to show. And let's also get rid of this and drive this with something else. So for this, possibly we're going to drive this with a noise. So we always like driving with noise. Noise is always fun to drive with. So I'm also going to get this here. Let's apply this noise over to this part, and then we can now choose to drive directly here with this. You will now start noticing that we have this happening. Now if you switch down to this part, you will see that we have displacement, and the more I increase the displacement going forward, you are also noticing that this object is being displaced by that. So if I push this all the way to 2 and also play with the scale that we have for the noise, you will now see that we are also having our entire object being displaced at a very given time. So you can use this to your own advantage. If you want to set this to cells, if you want to set this to intensity, this is just totally fine. And at certain points, you might also want to play with, you know, how crazy these things can get, that you can simply make use of any of this, you know, nodes that you have from here, and you can use them to drive things. So if I simply go through and get possibly a math function right here and choose to drive the math function that we have here by the same math function, or maybe by a given value. So I'm just going to let this be, and connect this over to the height, you would still notice that we're having this. We now have a brand new displacement going on, and I can use the value from here to drive how much of the displacement I want. It's also worth noting that this tool is currently under development, as it does come with a couple of bugs, but for the time being, it is also a tool that is worthy of you going through and trying them out. So that's definitely going to be about it. I would like to know what you guys think about this in the comment section. And of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.